former RAF base, Greenham Common, or United States Air Force Station, AF 486, was situated in County of Berkshire, just southeast of the town of Newbury and roughly 55 miles to the west of London. Two years into World War II, the RAF bought the common land and then a building on airfield commenced. A year later, Greenham Common was opened. And in the same year, the RAF turned over the base to the United States Air Force. When the war ended in Europe in 1945 on VE Day, the airfield was used less frequently and it remained dormant for the next 5 years. In the late 80s, both the US and Soviet Union signed the Intermediate Range Nuclear Forces Treaty, which means that both sides had to reduce the amount of nuclear missiles at their disposal. For Greenham Common, this meant the removal of all its missiles from its base, the last of which left the base in 1991. On June 5th, 1944, 24 hours before history's biggest military operation ever mounted in which Greenham Common had a massive role in, a regiment of the 101st Airborne Battalion, 502nd Parachute Infantry Regiment, was stationed at the Common, and at 8:30 p.m. General Dwight D. Eisenhower made his famous Eyes of the World speech.
Soldiers, sailors, and airmen of the Allied Expeditionary Force, you are about to embark upon the great crusade toward which we have striven these many months. The eyes of the world are upon you.
The Greenham Common is now the home for a new industrial estate, and the airfield itself having its tarmac being ripped up and with nature now coming back. The missile silos are in fact still owned by the MOD and is currently fenced off from the rest of the Common. There are currently plans to turn the airfield's control tower into a museum. As the Eastern and Western powers are raging on, with the world waiting for which power would hit that red button to cause a potential World War III. The US Air Force would then return to the airfield in 1953 as a base to house their aircraft, and also their nuclear weapons. With tensions rising from both sides of the Berlin Wall every day, month and year, the Common then became more well known with something you wouldn't expect. In the 1980s, 30,000 women either walked or travelled to the airfield, and then proceeded to hold each other's hands around the base's perimeter of 6 miles. The protests were about the placement of the US cruise missiles being stored there. These women were nicknamed the Greenham Women, or Peace Women, and their protests lasted for a staggering 19 years, with their cause drawing the attention of the media, mainly due to them cutting through the base's fences. When you first heard that the cruise missiles were being sighted in Europe, how did you feel about it?
There was a backstory to this. It didn't come out of the blue. I don't know if you're watching Deutschland 83, any of you? But there was, essentially it was a Cold War starting up between Russia and America. And in Britain we were called America's, what do you call those ships with the planes off? What do you call those with the planes take off the cruise ship?
Air carriers.
Air carriers.
Yeah. So we were being teased by being called America's aircraft carrier. And what was happening was that this sort of antagonism between the two of them was hotting up, and it seemed that we were beginning to understand that they were planning on using Europe as an arena for their next war ground. I mean, A didn't like that the lack of sort of democratic control over our own defences and our own territory because of America's power over us. But then it was the nature of the war that was being planned, and as Einstein said, the first wars was fought with sticks and stones, but the last war, the Third World War, will be back fighting with sticks and stones again. And it's the power and the scale of these nuclear bombs which was really, really alarming, and that we would just be in the middle of it, and America would be essentially okay, as would Russia, as be us idiots in the middle who would be destroyed. And so I felt, like many people, appalled, but also very, very frightened, because we had no control, and it was just they seemed to be right American, right, seemed to be ratcheting up this antagonism.
Yeah.
So there was a sense that, for many of us, particularly, I talked to my mum and grandma, they said, enough is enough, boys, and I know you guys are all boys here, but there is a sense that women are often excluded, and have been historically, from genuine political power. And we've seen World War I, the war to end all world wars. World War II came very shortly after. My brother fought in the Falklands War, And there was every generation of men in my family, right back to the Boer War, and probably earlier, fought in a war. And because of the nature of these bombs, there was just a sense from many people, but particularly women, are saying, enough is enough, lads. You've got to stop it because this is going to end in tears.
It's instinct.
No, it's rational intellectual thought
How?
rather than instinct. You know, and being relatively politically informed, you know, it's just clearly insane. In fact, you know, it's called MAD, mutually assured destruction. If Russia set off a bomb, NATO then would return their bombs and we just mutually destroy each other. I mean, how is that a sane way to go about geopolitics in this day and age? I mean, the same issues are applying to Trident, so this issue is become more current for you guys. So each cruise missile, I don't know if you realise, has the capacity to it's like 4 Hiroshima bombs, and I don't know if you've seen Hiroshima, you know about Hiroshima. The devastation, like one bomb has 4 times the power of that. I think, what is the point? What do we do? Do we want to turn a quarter of the planet into a fireball? What are the repercussions going to be? And who is going to clear up the mess? And it will almost always be women who follow around wars with buckets and bandages, picking up the pieces and running the country when you guys are fighting or destroying each other. That's what it felt like.
Yeah. And when you heard that the protests were happening in Greenham,
I thought, great, yeah, do it. About time. Somebody's got to do something because these nutters in charge are behaving irrationally.
and how much of an effect did the peace protests have on the missile crisis at Greenham Common?
Well, you have to look through the media, the right-wing media propaganda. My brother was an officer in the armed forces, and I can tell you that he knew that we were having a dramatic effect. And you will find, and latterly the information has been released, that the Americans wanted to pull out when they saw the demonstration at the base, because they were very concerned that there was genuine public disapproval and unease about this, and they were ready to pull the plugs, but it was Heseltine who overruled it. So we were definitely having an effect, and when we got in and we painted like one of their super secret airplanes, it was a Blackbird, I think, we daubed that with paint. It really upset, because these were supposed to be top secret, A is top secret, and secondly protected by the army, but us girls got in and just painted it, and so we were making a mockery of their secrecy. And if we could do that to the planes, anybody could access the bombs, which was one of the concerns, that when they came out, because they have to come out and do manoeuvres, have a little run around, anybody, terrorists or foreign interests, could have stolen these weapons of mass destruction and used them on anybody, used them to blackmail us. So the whole thing was just an insane, preposterous, but profoundly frightening situation. It's war games. We're using our lives as collateral damage.
The protests went on for 19 years. How long did you stay?
Well, I began with the big march and held hands around the base. My mum was there, so she was a grandmother. There were thousands of us from all over the world, and that was a really, really moving experience. And it's been copied many times over around Europe and the world. The Greenham Women's Protest is something that's been copied because it seemed that sort of peaceful, personal protest seems to be quite effective. Then after that, when I came to Queen Mary's, and when I first joined, we were having these introductory talks, and one stands out in my mind. We were talking about staff development, and overhead there were just helicopters going tum 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 across this building, because it was like being in the middle of Apocalypse Now, that film, or one of those powerful World War II, and they were flying in the cruise missiles as we were talking. So the idea of talking about staff development when people were planning to destroy this part of the planet, it just seemed so ludicrous. So I used to go up a lot. Lunch times, I'd take colleagues up to have a look at in the evenings. I'd take women back to have a bath and things like that. So, and before that, I'd been up there and living there short periods of time.
The peace protest was called a women's peace protest. What kind of outcome did you expect from that?
So somebody had to do something. The protests that were going on through the usual channels, writing, going to MPs, demonstrating in London, they weren't having an effect. So we had to do something different. We had to do something which had a completely different media appeal, because remember, most of the newspapers, the media station, most of the newspapers are owned by Tories, and it's Tory propaganda sheets. So they were against us because it was their policy to bring in with Heseltine to bring their nukes. So we were never going to get a fair press. But the women at Greenham are of all classes, creeds, political persuasions. It was just enough is enough. So what was the question?
It was called a women's peace protest.
Yeah,
What
so
outcome did you expect?
Well, we had to do something different, and So it's really important that even though many men were very sympathetic, they couldn't be there because it had to be very different, because men would just muddy the issue, because we'd had men and women demonstrations before, and it hadn't made any difference. And we thought we'd do something really unusual and unique and say, look, mothers of the earth, we've had enough. You cannot go ahead with this. We're trying to protect our children and everybody's children and our sons from this madness. So we thought it was so unusual, and media love images, don't they? We thought it was so unusual that it just might crack through that Tory barricade of media interests. And of course it did for a moment, for that one moment it did. It really shocked the establishment. And it raised public awareness. But then the black propaganda onslaught happened. I just want to read you something from a defence correspondent of the time.
Go ahead.
It says, in fact, as the women's protest at Greenham demonstrated so spectacularly, the deployment of cruise missiles had absolutely the opposite effect domestically. It alarmed British and Europeans, even some of those who broadly supported NATO's strategy, and the fear that, if deterrence failed, the Americans now secretly planned to fight their nuclear war in Europe, devastating our civilization while leaving their own homeland intact. And I should add that the brother I mentioned, he'd been taking part. He'd just had a massive practice of this scenario in Europe. It's called Operation Lionheart, I believe. And so all the NATO forces had a practice in Germany, I think, or something like that. And his feedback about that was, you know that dead civilians are called collateral damage. They don't call us, they use all these euphemisms. Well, there was so much collateral damage, so many dead civilians in Europe after just a minor attack, that they were using bulldozers to practice clearing us up. And it's just things like that. I mean, that's how scary this situation was. And it's going to happen if we talk about, you've got to deal with, you guys have got to get on top of Trident and find out what's going on and what this purpose is. At what point would we ever use a weapon with such a massive weapon power? When we do really well, look at the terrorists in London, you can just bomb a train and it wreaks havoc. What do you want to start firestorms and slaughter millions of people? Anyway.
So imagine that being a terrifying thought then.
Well, of course it is. You just think we are living in an insane world. Who are these guys in charge?
What were your relationships like with the US military personnel?
Well, I didn't see many Americans. It was mostly British troops were deployed around the bases, and we used to go and try and talk to them. And I remember there were some Welsh guards there, and we would say, look, because they've got a really strong sort of socialist history, haven't they? And they're really into people's history. They are, they're much more thoughtful often than sort of your English lads who get drafted into the army. I know it's a stereotype, but Welsh guys have got a much stronger connection to their working class history. So we used to try and talk to them, and actually we did change a lot of these guys' minds, got very unhappy about working there because they could see we were right. And we talked to them as mums. We'd say, look, what did your mum think of it? And they used to get some of them get quite tearful, and we'd hear it. And in the end, they were banned from talking to us. So relations were often quite cordial, although I know some of the women were, when we climbed over, some of them were tied to some of the fencing, and how the American soldiers, and I'm sorry about this, but they masturbated over them and threatened them and sexually abused them. They were taken into sort of cells and kept overnight and things like that, and had all sorts of, I don't know, you'd have to talk to them. I know there were some not very nice things happened to the women.
And did you or anyone with you see them as enemies or cogs in a bigger machine?
I saw the Brits as cogs in the machine. I saw the Americans as invaders. If you went to Greenham, I took a colleague of mine who was a senior management person here, who was saying, oh, well, I'm not going to get involved. I'm a scientist. I'm going to be neutral in this. I don't know. I can see both sides. Well, I took her there, and that night we had the special branch police. We were being filmed on both from inside the camp and outside the police, and she had never ever been into a situation like this, and she was called all sorts of vulgar, names that women get called, and she was so shocked and appalled that it was so undemocratic that in our own society we were being treated as if we were in a fascist state, that she joined the Greenham women. Because it was like being in a totalitarian state where if you stood up and said, no, we don't want this, you were brutalised, filmed. My phone was tapped, my parents' phone was tapped, my brother's phone was tapped. I knew this because you could hear noises when the phone, when it went up, you picked it up when you put it down. And then one time the phone rang, and there was a relaying of a phone conversation we just had on the phone. My car was followed by the police. when I was around here, if I went to Greenham, police cars would appear from nowhere and follow me to Greenham or coming into college. I had a special branch guy come in to question me at Queen Mary's College. So there was that, expect that in, don't you, in sort of in the old Cold War Eastern Germany, but it was happening here, and it was very frightening.
I guess wherever you went, you felt like someone was kind of watching you.
Yeah, that's right. And why? Because we're trying to protect our beautiful countryside and our people and our children and our own lives. It's democratic, right? We weren't protesting about anything. We were protesting about an insane situation.
Were you aware of any of the protesters having relations with the service personnel?
They may have done, I wouldn't know. Only interactions were verbal, or when we cut fences down, they'd come and grab us, or when we lay in front of the road to stop the missiles coming in and out, the police charged us, and horses would tread on us, or the guys would drag us off, imprison us. Those are the sorts. Many women went to prison over and over for trespass and things like that. But we were trying to claim that Greenham is common. It's called Greenham Common. It's common land. That means land that was held in common from time immemorial, although it was bought by the Americans, just superseded that. So it's all these illegal things going on. It was like America was colonising us to play war games with us.
Literally thousands I've heard or read about even.
Yeah,
thousands
there were
and thousands constantly in the span of the 19 years.
That's right, and goodness knows how much of public money was spent servicing and building those silos at great expense, and policing it. That's right, and all that. Taxpayers' money wasn't an issue when you want to play war games.
Yeah. From some old footage we saw, many protesters managed to break down some of the fence and the perimeter of the base. Did you ever get involved with taking down the fence?
Yeah, because we saw this fence and you thought, we just try to undermine, you get all this rather pompous military stuff. So you just undermine it, you puncture that balloon, and you go in and you paint their aeroplanes. Because you were trying to make it ludicrous, because it was ludicrous. So we just thought, look, we don't like this fence, what are we going to do? We've got some fence cutters, so loads of us got there. We said, right, we're going to cut the fence down. You put a fence up, we don't like your fence, it's wrong, it's undemocratic, well, we just cut it down. Boy, were they not expecting that. That created a real storm for the military when they realised what we'd done, because we were breaching their security, and this was supposed to be a high security area. If we could do it with hedge cutters, what could the Russians do, or serious military people?
And were you aware that you may or may have not could have got arrested for that?
Yes, I tried to run. There were other women who were much braver than I was, who went in and stood on the silo, and that's that famous picture of them dancing on the silo. Yeah. But these guys coming at you with guns and military gun, that's really scary. I used to run away. But I cut it down. I was happy to cut it down and stuff.
Were you involved in that Reflect the Base event?
No, I wasn't. I don't remember being involved in that one, but that's another clever idea. We were trying to be creative.
Symbolically.
Yes, that's right. And it's reflecting back, what are you doing? This is what, who do you think you are, sort of thing. Yeah.
Did you know anyone else who was involved in action apart from your family?
Lots of people. Most sane women of the time seemed to be involved, although some were nothing to do with media. That's the sort of thing. Some people just are not interested in the world, are they? Not interested in engaging with their own, their own state of the democracy of their own country. But yes, I knew an awful lot of people, particularly I did not long left university, so clearly a lot of educated women would be involved, because it doesn't take much thought to see what was going on was wrong.
I'm assuming, have you kept in touch with the people that you met?
Yeah.
That's good.
Yeah.
It's really nice.
Yeah.
If you could sum up your experience, the people, the atmosphere, the protests, your overall time at Greenham Common, for as long as you've been there, what would you say about it?
I'm enormously proud. I'm really proud that my mum was there. I'm really proud. It was really people from all around the world used to tell me. I had Australians, New Zealanders come out and say, look, you don't realise what you're doing, but people all around the world are watching what you do in Greenham, because you've set the standard for peaceful protest. So it had an enormous ripple effect on peace movements around the world, and it sort of empowered women to feel that they could challenge the military-industrial complex and do something about it. And it was a really effective, memorable moment in history, in people's struggle against power, a sort of dictatorial power. I mean, you guys know about it. And it was a wonderfully moving, it was a profoundly moving experience to have so many women standing up against what we perceived as an insane and terrifying future for everyone.
The legacy that Greenham Common has left us with is that of a long military history that will forever be embedded with the local area. It is also a reminder of a cold and tense period of history that could have brought about total nuclear war between two radically different economic powers. A reminder of the women who protested for 20 years against the storage of nuclear weapons, at the base and fought to give the land back to the public. Now the Common is thriving with nature, returning to take its rightful place back, and is now a wildlife of national importance. A business complex that has served local communities and employees well. The future shines bright on the Common, and we can only hope that international affairs don't intervene with the 18-year peace since it became parkland.